Welcome to Italics, television for the Italian-American experience. I'm your host, Anthony Tamburri. On June 2nd, we went to the Center at West Park Sanctuary Space for the Unplugged concert and site-specific performance titled In Sardinia in New York. This event features the acclaimed polyphonic Pauliccu Mossa choir of Bonorva, alongside American playwright Jeff Biggers, renowned for his celebrated book, In Sardinia. We had the privilege to speak with Valeria Orani, curator and creative producer, and with Jeff Biggers.
I started to work in theater when I was very young. I was 14 years old. After my high school, I started to tour with theater, so I became a nomad, as many theater persons. So I am a Sardinian. I am a typical Sardinian, as in the meaning that when you grow up in an island, you need to go out and then maybe come back. It's not something connected with the struggling to look for a better life, but is the curiosity to see how is the world after the sea. Sometimes you escape from your roots, and then as far you go, and as an elastic you come back. More you go far, and more you are attracted to these roots. If I have to start describing Sardinia to somebody that never knows where is Sardinia, I can say there is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Sardinia is one of the oldest land in the Mediterranean Sea as a civilization.
And then there is Sardinia, the autonomous region of Sardinia, where a civilization older than ancient Rome, older than the Etruscans, older than Magna Graecia, served as the cradle of the Bronze Age and the staging ground for thousands of years of Mediterranean and Italian history. Because of the sea. You must arrive by the sea, the Mediterranean. So look at this new map that a cartographer showed us from France. She said, you need to look at the world in a different way. Move that world 90 degrees. And then you begin to see how real history unfolded in the Mediterranean. The history unfolded on the sea, as the great historian Abu Falia reminded us. He called the corridors of the Mediterranean the great and most rigorous corridor of exchange of ideas and civilization in the ancient world, connecting the Middle East with Africa and Europe. And there, in the center, look at that. There in the center, not on the periphery of history, connected to the Levant and Cyprus, connected to ancient Egypt, to ancient Greece. There in the center of that map is the island of Sardinia, which plays a central role in the Mediterranean story as a nation. It reminds us, if we want to understand Italy today and the rest of Europe, you must first understand Sardinia and the Mediterranean.
Bom, I first stumbled into Italy in 1988. I lived in Florence for a short period, and I left, and then I met another Italian woman and came back in 1988 to Bologna. During all these years, we traveled throughout, from the top in Gorizia on the border of Slovenia all the way down through Calabria to Sicily. And for 30 years, we really tried to understand what it was to live in Italy and all these great different regions and all these great cultural movements and the layers of history that go back to ancient Rome and then even older to the Etruscans and even older to Magna Graecia. And it took us 30 years finally to cross over to go to Sardinia. Many of our friends, from Bologna and from Rome and from Milan were saying, what are you going to do in Sardinia after a week on the beach? There's nothing else to see. And we thought, wow, there's this fascinating concept that this part of Italy somehow had no cultural contributions, no history. And in fact, I took one book with me in English by D.H. Lawrence, who made this great journey in 1921. He spent 6 days in Sardinia and then went and scribbled within 3 weeks a book called Sea in Sardinia, which became the most important, really one of the pioneering works of travel literature. And he wrote in 1921, in Sardinia there is no history, no offering, no race, no date. And I thought, I think there must be a different story. And so we began to travel, going to village, to festival, to meet with artists, to meet with writers, realizing, oh my God, this island is a floating island of narration, going back thousands of years. And so I began to collect books and monographs and to interview people and to really begin the process of understanding this unique island. This unique island has its own language and 5 variants and 75 different dialects, and each area with its own forms of cultural aspirations and contributions. And that ultimately began this unexpected journey of Sardinia. So it's interesting to think about how I began to put together this book, for example. I would go village to village and pick up monographs and all sorts of books and pamphlets, thinking that, one day I'll get to them. And I began to do interviews with different writers and artists and journalists and historians. And then we got hit with COVID, of course. And so I returned to the United States with suitcases of over 350, almost 400 books that just sat there in my office waiting to be transcribed. And the silver lining of being stuck in our houses for those 18 months was the fact that I was given the opportunity to really begin the process of reading the actual voices and writers. In that sense, I often see my book as a messenger for the literature and the voices of Sardinia that often haven't been translated into English.
Poetry and Sardinia is very connected. Every village has its own poetry slam. They improvise the poetry, and they have this challenge with people. So the choir is the son of this kind of culture. They are 20 men, maybe more, maybe less, depends. Everybody is not professional. Everybody has other jobs, but everybody are connected by this passion of singing together. The polyphonic music, so using also the cantu a tenores, that is the basic singing mode in Sardinia. So the UNESCO protect cantu. The canto a tenore is basically 4 voices. So the polyphonic chorus is 20 voices. So they expand these voices for many other people, and maybe also more, because they have they could be more. In any case, the base is the canto a tenore. The 4 registers are always the same. The choir is named after Pauliccu Mossa. That is one of the most important poetry in Sardinia. So Pauliccu Mossa was from Bonorva, and they are named after him. And they use many poems of this poetry. So these are Sardinian poems written in Logudorese. That is one of the main languages, dialect of Sardinia. Sardinia has an idioma that is Sardinian, but also many other sub-idiomas. So one of them is Logudorese. It is ununderstandable, so nobody can understand if it doesn't know.
Years ago, the Sardinian traders traversed the seas to trade obsidian to Italy, in fact, and France. 6,000 years ago, the first and only ziggurat, a platform pyramid, was built in Sardinia, Monte Code. A platform pyramid that served as the ancient pilgrimage site for the whole Mediterranean. And then we finally come to the Bronze Age, 4,000 years ago, the rise of what we call the Nuragic civilization that built these 3-story towers, multiple towers, complexes, decentralized society that was incomparable with anywhere in Europe, and they still stand today. These little bronze boats from Sardinia from 3,000 years ago have been found anywhere from England to the Maghreb of North Africa, all the way back to the Levant. 4,000 years ago, as the great navigators of the sea, the Sardinians left their dishes in Cyprus. They left their oil and wine in ancient Greece. Their silver and lead has been tested to be found in the great tombs of King Solomon. Their bronze swords have been found in Iberia of Spain, and all the way to Cornwall. In fact, a 3,000-year-old bronze helmet with these horns of a toro were found in Denmark 2,000 years before the Vikings. You see, this map is far from an empty stage. Each dot represents a Neolithic bronze site. And in fact, it's so incomplete. There are tens of thousands of Bronze Age towers called nuraghi and settlements that cover the island. And here's the kicker. Out of all these thousands of sites, less than 2% have been excavated. So amongst the massive treasures of Sardinia, we have yet to truly discover the amazing treasures left behind. This past is a presence in Sardinia. These nuraghi towers breathe life into a modern Sardinia, a presence that speaks of resiliency, sustainability, innovation through tradition, good wine, but most importantly, resistance, if we are willing to listen to their presence.
So it's important not to be nostalgic about ancient times as if, oh, the glory of the Bronze Age, and then what happened? And so my role was to look at not what was done to Sardinia, but what had Sardinia done to the rest of the world. And that's when I began to discover, even in modern contemporary times, the Sardinians played a crucial role in the shaping of modern Italy and the shaping of modern Europe.
You know, I don't know if it's the church, but you guys seem like a really serious audience here. So let's try to loosen it up here. Let's go back to 1921, because I remember it well. And our dear friend D.H. Lawrence, who we all loved, you know, we all had to read his books in school. And he had this long journey in Sardinia. He spent 6 days. And he went back and he wrote a book that defined the island in the English language readers for the next 100 years. Remember, in Sardinia, he said, there is no history. There is no race, no offering, no date, nothing. Nothing to see. In 1921, what was really happening in this place that had no history, no people, no nothing? In that same week, the D.H. Lawrence was in Sardinia. A young man, a young journalist named Antonio Gramsci was in Torino, publishing an amazing newspaper. And then with another young student named Togliatti, they founded the Communist Party of Italy as Sardinians. And Gramsci's political theories continue to shape so much of our understanding of cultural hegemony today. In 1921, in that same month that D.H. Lawrence was in Sardinia, Emilio Lussu, the great World War I hero, and his fellow soldiers founded the first political party for autonomy in all of Europe. And for me, the cautionary tale of Lussu is that he said, you must beware of the buffoons who are courting violence that will lead to fascism. Emilio Lussu had written a book that the New York Times said was better than anything Hemingway would ever write. He, of course, went on to be imprisoned, and then he escaped and be one of the great leaders of the resistance. And after the war, he wrote part of the Italian Constitution. In 1921, in Nuoro, where D.H. Lawrence said, oh, good, there's nothing to see, I can get back on the bus. In Nuoro, there's Francesco Ciusa, the great sculptor who had created the Athens of Sardinia. All these artists, they had won accolades at the Biennale in Venice. They were changing the way we are seeing nudes in the human sculpture. And there in Nuoro had been raised Grazia Deledda, who in 5 years would become the first Italian woman to win the Nobel laureate for literature. And she didn't write a book in 1921. She wrote 5 of them. And think about it. The greatest novelist of that period, we only have 4 of her books translated in English. In 1921, we had Aldina Attarra, who was Frida Kahlo 10 years before Frida Kahlo. This wild woman from Sassari who had went to Milano and completely uprooted the system of the arts and the graphic arts and the fashion industry, bringing in the beautiful Sardinian dresses and changing the way we acted in the 1920s with fashion. In Hollywood, we already had a villager named Augusto Bissiri who had helped to invent the cathode ray that turned into the TV and film. But careful what Lussu tells us. Lussu said nostalgia is a dangerous game for Sardinians. He said you can't glorify your neurotic civilization and then turn your back on 2,000 years of domination, of oppression. In 1921, when Lawrence was there was an uprising of coal miners and a bloody massacre, which led finally to the recognition of a union 14 years before our coal miners would have a union in the United States. And in fact, it was the bloody strikes of the miners that affected the first general strike of all of Italy. It was resistance, Gramsci told us, resistance that Sardinia was showing the world. And in Rome, there was a cadre of Sardinians, and they created one of the most popular magazines. It was called Giornale Sardo. And in Rome, it was published by a great ethnomusicologist and an artist and a poet, because they said, Sardinia will germinate the rest of Italy with our beautiful ideas. To make history, you have to create history. In the valley of the Noraghi, where this choral group comes from, the land of the golden place, we call it, Lugo d'Oro, there's an ancient village of Rebecchio that is creating history. And this is thanks to the village of Bonorva, who have agreed to hand over this village to artists, to makers, to someone we call a Yana, which is sort of like a good witch or an organization or someone works really hard in organizations. And that's a woman named Valeria Orani. Valeria, as the good witch, the good Yana, came back 4 years ago and began to create a festival thanks to Bonorva. And the festival began to grow, and here we have a so-called abandoned medieval town with this ancient 3,000-year-old Nuragic fountain. And she said, we'll turn it into an incubator of arts, not arts for art's sake, but arts for regeneration, to recall Sardinians back to their roots. And so Valeria began to invite people from around the world, the grandchildren and the children of Sardinians who had moved on from other places. She invited architects and engineers to re-envision not an ancient agropolis, but a futuristic ecopolis, self-sufficient. She talked to farmers, and she now is reaching out to create an annual festival that will go year-round as a place that will become the great incubator.
Musamadre Festival is an idea completely out of the ordinary. Now we are at the 4th edition of this festival. There is Musamadre Festival. It's residences for artists, for retreat, for writers. It's a place where you can create, and is a place to reconnect. So it is almost also focused to guest emigrant artists or descendants artists. Not only, of course, everybody is welcome. We invite artists from all the disciplines, like dance and visual art, movies, writers, authors of any kinds. This unique and neutral third place could be very important to reconnect with the nature, with the history, with the soul, and also with the people of Sardinia. For me, Musamadre Festival is a little utopia. This is an experiment, and I think we artists, I can say we artists, we have a privilege. We can create. We are very, very, very lucky. And I want to feel this lucky thing in my life. I don't want to be stressed, and I want to spread this lucky thing with all the people around, you know.
So what is the future of Sardinia? You know, that's a great question, and that's why I'm here I'm a participant in an incredible community experiment, an incubator of arts and eco revival, what I call regeneration, in the medieval village called Pauliccu. And there's a project called the Musamadre project that is calling back Sardinians from around the world to reclaim their heritage, once again this tradition as innovation, and to fill up a village that once was abandoned and to turn it into an incubator, a laboratory, not just for the arts, but arts that are engaged in experience, engaged with history, engaged with the local villagers, engaged with the local communities, to think of what we can do in the future. And I think that's one of the main struggles in Sardinia today, is how do we get beyond a tourism that is seasonal, that ultimately comes and exploits and leaves, and how do we begin to create a cultural tourism that has deep roots that allow us to use things like technology.
We need to collect our efforts to change the course of the history in Sardinia. The little villages are giving up their houses for $1. They are not seeing the value of the history, and maybe we can. So we as immigrants or descendants or lovers of Sardinia, we can a little bit change the route. I guess so. This is my hope, but I don't know.
In Sardinia, so cross the sea, and when you're in flowering America, tell everyone that the island of Sardinia is still waiting to be discovered and known for those willing to understand it. Grazie da lei da America in Sardinia in 1893.
Amigos y gatas africanas, bimbo. Aquí venía y novio de farina, bimbo.
This show is not finishing at the theater. It's going out to have a little appendix at the West Tower. And in this big courtyard that connects the West Towers, we will find cavallini di Nivola, or concrete horses by Nivola, very important pieces of art by Costantino Nivola. Costantino Nivola was a Sardinian artist that worked in Italy with Olivetti as a graphic designer before to leave to the United States during the war, and living there for many, many years. Then he died here in New York. He was always connected with this island, and every work he produced, he gave to the world, is a piece of Sardinian art.
Inora Malaganno a affilare, Inora Malaganno filascomo, Inora Malaganno a affilare, Inora Malaganno filascomo.
Thanks for watching this episode of Italics. I'm Anthony Tamburri. Arrivederci alla prossima puntata.